Okay, so this is the Bible study for January 6th, 2020, and it's continuing our fulfilled series in John chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. And remember that you can download PDF copies of the Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive. And the text for today is, on the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill these jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed him. After he went down to Capernaum with his mother, brothers, and his disciples. After this, they went down to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and disciples. There they stayed for a few days. Number one, what happened according to verses 2, 1, and 2 on the third day. A wedding took place at Cana of Galilee. B, Jesus' mother was there. C, Jesus and his disciples had also been invited. So all of these are true, and all of these are stated in verses 1 and 2. And of course, those of you that have been to a wedding, probably in most denominations, but certainly in the Church of the Nazarene, we mentioned that Jesus performed his first miracle at Cana of Galilee. And that's what's stated in here at the wedding. And so we kind of throw that into the ritual and say that means Jesus gave the thumbs up to the old weddings. Okay. He blessed it with his first miracle. Number two, what happened in verse 3? A, the wine was gone, and B, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." So this is the beginning of an interesting interaction that Jesus has with his mother. Um, there's a lot of things I can say. Um, but I can say that Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." Now, she didn't ask him to do anything, but obviously, she was a woman, he was a man, so he knew that even when they don't ask you to do something, when they tell you something, they know that they have an expectation that they want you to do something about it. So I don't want to start any marriage fights today or anything, but my wife comes into the room often and makes a statement. And if I don't recognize that that was a request for me to do something, even though she didn't ask for me to do anything, then I'm in trouble. I got to recognize that her statement means that the fact that she's telling me means I'm supposed to do something about that. And so Jesus knew when his mother said, "There is no more wine," that he's supposed to do something about it. And we know that he knew that because he said, "Why do you involve me?" Number 3 says, how did Jesus respond? A, "Woman, why do you involve me?" And then B, "My hour has not yet come." Now, my Bible has a footnote, and it has to be in there these days, that the Greek word for woman that's used there does not denote any disrespect. So unlike the way that sounds to us, that is not a disrespectful thing to say to his mother. It's more like dear woman as opposed to what we in our culture might hear when we hear just woman. Um, so he says, why do you involve me? But he says, my time has not yet come. My hour has not yet come. So there's a specific reason that she doesn't seem to know about or care about as to why he doesn't think he should be involved in this situation. And I think that that's where we're going to find some kind of significance in here. So number 4 says, what time or hour is Jesus talking about? A, Jesus was very sensitive to God's timing and how it differed from ours. And B, it was clear that Jesus's family did not understand God's plan. So constantly, particularly in the book of John, we find Jesus referring to his time, and when his time would come. And his family was making requests of him because they knew about who he was, and they knew what was going on, and they knew about his abilities, but he was holding off in sort of revealing himself until the proper time, and his family just didn't seem to understand any of that, and they didn't seem to care, but Jesus cared very much about it. So B refers to John 7:3-6, and it says, Jesus' brothers said to him, leave Galilee and go to Judea so that your disciples there may see the works you do. No one who wants to become a public figure acts in secret. Since you are doing these things, show yourself to the world, for even his own brothers did not believe in him. Therefore, Jesus told them, my time is not yet here. For you, any time will do. So there's a couple things in that text about how his brothers, they didn't seem to really believe, and they seem to be kind of jabbing him and saying, if you want to be a public figure, go do these things out in front of everybody so that your disciples can see them. Nobody who wants to be a public figure does these things in secret, but Jesus's response is, my time is not yet here. For you, any time will do. So you don't understand what's going on here, and you don't really care about what's happening. But for you, any time will do. And this is not my time. It's not my time. So that was going to Jerusalem in the middle of this festival and in a sort of a public display. And he did end up going a little later and more secretly. Um, Number 5, what kind of jars did Jesus tell the servants to fill? A, large stone water jars. B, the kind you would put wine in. C, the kind you would use to wash your hands. D, the kind used to represent ceremonial purification. So is everything but B. So it says they're about 20 to 30 gallons apiece, large stone jars, but they were used for ceremonial hand washing. And so they would be just large jars of water where you would wash your hands in them. And 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 he says, well, go fill them with water, and then they end up being filled with wine ultimately. um, Number 6, what did Jesus tell the servants to do? Enjoy the banquet and trust that he would take care of everything. B, find some wine to fill the jars. C, fill the jars with water. D, draw from the jars and take some to the master of the banquet. So here's the significance of this. Um, Whenever we see one of Jesus's miracles, and ultimately throughout Scripture, when God does miraculous things in the lives of His people, we see that he calls to obedience. So there's an action that we take that ultimately he produces the miracle out of. And it's really important when we're watching the signs, and we're going to read a lot about different signs in the book of John. It's really important to recognize in what context and in what way does Jesus produce signs, produce miracles? Because we're the kind of ones that want to sit back and enjoy the banquet while Jesus performs all the miracles. And he just does all the cool things for our enjoyment, and we just enjoy ourselves. Excuse me. But B, and that's A, B represents the opposite of that, which would be we find wine and we do the thing and we do the work. So what Jesus says is step out in faith, fill the jars with water, and then take the draw some of that out and take it to the master of the banquet. and and so there's steps of faith there. So if you're the servant, you have to first fill the jar, which is just a menial task, but it really requires faith for you to take something that you know is water to the master of the banquet. You just filled the jar, and now you're going to put it in something else and take it to the master of the banquet. And that sounds like a real test of faith. But all of that had to happen. They didn't make the wine, they didn't put wine in the jars, but they ultimately were the ones that had to fill the jars and step out in faith in order for Jesus to perform this great miracle. Number 7, how did the servants respond? A, they laughed at Jesus. B, they told Jesus that this didn't make any sense. These are all the ways that we would respond. C, they sat and worried about what they would do so that they didn't get in trouble when the wine was gone. We like to do that too. D, they filled the jars with water, but tasted what they were taking to the master of the banquet before they made fools of themselves. That sounds like something we would do. Or E, they did as Jesus said, which seems to be what happened. And so I think it's important to understand that we have to be a part of this miraculous sign. We have to be the part where we obey in faith and we take steps of faith. Um, but there's all sorts of steps in between that we would rather check and make sure that we're not looking foolish, and where we really don't trust, and we need to take these steps of faith trusting. um, Number 8, what do you do when Jesus calls you to do something that doesn't make sense? Well, I think we'd be tasting the wine in between. I think we'd be saying that none of that makes sense. And instead of doing the thing, we'd be sitting there worrying. I love the story of Naaman in the Old Testament, who's told to wash himself. I believe it's in the Jordan, and he says, "Man, there's way better, there's cleaner rivers back home. That doesn't even make sense." And they said, "If he had told you to do some large thing, wouldn't you have done it? But this small thing you won't do because it doesn't make sense." And ultimately, he did it, and he was healed, right? Um, so number 9, what happened? A, they were all so drunk they thought it was wine. That is not what we're told happened. B, the wine was the best of the banquet. It wasn't uh, something that could pass for wine to a drunk person. The master of the banquet recognized that this was the best wine that they had served thus far. The master of the banquet was impressed. Number 10 says, what is the purpose of the signs, according to chapter 2, verse 11? What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory and his disciples believed in him. So he was revealing his glory, and his disciples were believing in him. And this, we talked about this in the introduction to John. We're going to go over this again toward the end. He tells why he recorded these signs, and he could have recorded even more. And we find out that all of it was so that people would believe. Jesus was revealing his glory, and his disciples were believing.